Great. Okay.
Hey.
So it is 4:02, and I know people are still joining. We have showing about 145 participants, which is just great. And as I mentioned, for those of you just joining us, as you know, we just put this out yesterday at 1 o'clock, and it's really great to see how many people are on this Zoom call. This is our 7th Zoom Community Forum, and obviously this afternoon we're going to be talking about a very important, timely topic. We'll be getting to that just momentarily. I do want to mention that normally these have been on Wednesday, and we do have another Zoom tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 p.m. with Matthew Green, the Senior Policy Advisor for the Oregon Health Authority, and Jackie Yerby, who's the Deputy Health Advisor to Governor Kate Brown. Of course, we'll be talking about reopening. That was something that we scheduled several days ago, and now reopening is taking on definitely a different context. So that should be an interesting. We hope you can join us as well. You can register for that if you haven't already done so. Obviously, our country is reeling right now, and I know we're all concerned about the state of affairs in our nation and in our own backyard here in Portland. And we have two excellent speakers today that I'm going to introduce. So what we're going to do, I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll have a few questions that we're going to put forward. And if you have a question, you can use the Q&A down at the bottom. I would just ask if you don't mind waiting just a few minutes before you type in your questions. It's easier for us to moderate them as opposed to them coming in right away. So we will get to as many of those questions as possible. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Emmett Wheatfall. Emmett is a retired assistant county administrator for Clackamas County in Oregon City, and he has spent over 30 years as a professional in the area of equity, inclusion, and diversion. And I can tell you, and I understand exactly why, organizations, large and small, have called on him for his advice, his insights, for training, and for his public speaking. He is also a pastor at Remember the Hope Christian Fellowship, and he is, in addition, a wonderful, eloquent poet, having had several books of poetry published, and I would love to commend those books to you. So welcome, Emmett. Pastor Edie Mondaine is the president of the Portland chapter of the NAACP, and he is also the senior pastor at Celebration Tabernacle Church. He's also, of course, a civic leader, a community organizer, an entrepreneur, having founded Post Shine's restaurant out in North Portland. And as if that weren't enough, he is also a musician. And if you haven't heard this man sing before, let me tell you, you are missing out, because he has one of the most angelic voices I have ever heard. And I've had the honor and pleasure of hearing him several times. So our Jewish Community Relations Council, which works with other organizations to safeguard the social safety net and promote civil rights and to combat hate and bigotry from wherever it emanates and whomever it targets. We have, over the years, done several Black Jewish dialogues. And in fact, that's how I got to know Emmett, who participated in 2 of our dialogue groups. And since that time, I can say that Emmett has become a close personal friend. And I know that many people in our community, Emmett, look up to you for your wisdom and your deep insight. So I want to welcome you. And Pastor Mondaine and his right-hand man, Antoine Tolbert, who is the secretary of the NAACP, I've gotten to know them over the last year and a half as our JCRC has partnered with the NAACP and other members of the local African-American community. We began planning for a series of programs and events that were to have taken place. Well, we had a couple of them take place, but most of them were not able to take place, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 virus. But we are meeting regularly And we are resuming planning for hopefully the coming year when circumstances allow us to have some of these programs that we think are important for both of our communities. And I'm excited to tell you about our, I think, which is our biggest joint project, which is a joint civil rights mission to the American South, to Atlanta, Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham, which was to have taken place this October. And unfortunately, we had to postpone it till October of 2021. This is an opportunity for us to learn about the history of the civil rights movement in the locations where most of it took place. But more than that, to learn about the injustices and the institutional racism that still plague our society today, as we are witnessing once again with the tragic and horrific death and murder of George Floyd. So what I'd like to do is, first off, again, thank you both for joining us. And I would like to both just ask you to briefly just reflect on what you're experiencing and observing in this past several days. And Emmett, I'll let you go first.
Okay. First and foremost, let me begin by just thanking you, Bob, and the Jewish Federation of Oregon and Jewish community for just extending an opportunity for me to just offer some thoughts and some perspectives on the situations facing our nation relative to the death of the unfortunate and brutal death of George Ford. I also want to put forth a qualifier, and I think it's really important. You know, I am African American. I am a descendant of Africans who've been brought to this country. I don't speak for all Black people or all African Americans. I am one voice among many voices. And I'm so delighted to be on a panel with Pastor Mondaine, because what I believe is that the two of us on this evening get an opportunity to give you what I would like to call a synoptic view. In other words, you know, you can actually hear our articulations about what's happening today, but you can see it through different sets of lens or from different points on the mountain peak that hopefully will help people develop a panoramic view. With the actual death of George Ford, all of us should not be surprised by what has happened. I like what Will Smith said. He basically said, the actor, Will Smith, said, you know, thank God for the advent of the video camera. Mm-hmm. Because now people are actually getting an opportunity to actually see what people of color and even poor whites have been saying has been happening to them by virtue of that unseen brutality perpetrated by law enforcement. As a matter of fact, I think even in the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, he talks about police brutality. Police brutality is nothing new. It's just that it's being exposed in a greater way through technology. Here's the other important thing to remember. It's important for me to say, not speaking for everybody, but we must understand that not all police are corrupt and bad. There are many of them that are noble. They're the guardians of our community. They're the civil guardians that protect each one of our liberties. But for me, what I'm struggling with is within the fraternal order of law enforcement. It's almost like once you're a part of the force, once you're a part of the fraternal order, or all of a sudden now you have a loyalty to the fraternal order and the profession and not to the people that you're supposed to serve.
Right.
For me, fundamentally, the first priority is loyalty to the people that you serve. And so, you know, this situation has reached a point where it can and must be changed. And the discourse and the protesting, not the looting and the violence, but the actual protest is summoning our nation to take a look at itself in the mirror, the man or woman in the mirror, and say, no, I need to address this issue. And it's troubling me because we need to get to that. I'll stop now and let Pastor Mondaine, if you'd like to respond a little bit.
We need to unmute you. Maybe Rachel can unmute you. There we go. Go ahead, Pastor.
I think you're absolutely right, Emmett. To further, it's real tragic when a race of people arrives at a realization that they're powerless. Powerlessness is the worst form of oppression, and it drives people to perpetuate not only their own sufferings, but the sufferings of others. In America, where Black people continue to find themselves powerless, our community often doesn't see the point of participating in the democratic process. There's a convincing narrative that would suggest that we will never win our struggle and that our participation serves no purpose. Over and over again, we have conversations. We thought we had overcome in '65. We thought that we had reached that mountaintop with Dr. King, and only to find out in 2016 that the needle hadn't moved really at all. We killed our clarion criers, and to no avail, we didn't hear the voice of the underlying racism that laced itself in our American system, woven in the very fabric that we live in, woven in the fabric that the state was incepted in. When we feel like our participation serves no purpose, we will not vote, and our voices will not be heard in the public square. There is an antidote to all of this: inclusion. We live in times that perhaps more than ever calls for our ability to rally around each other and encourage each other to become better by doing better, especially those of us who have privilege. It's time for you to flaunt that privilege and exercise that right in the most unapologetic way that you could ever possibly muster, and stand as an accomplice, not just an ally. An ally will follow you to the gate, but accomplices will go with you onto the battlefield. So I'm suggesting that you tattoo yourself or paint yourself Black and deliberately take up the charge of being the front runner, the incubator, or the nestler to help us move forward in which we cannot do by ourselves. Not because we're weak. We find ourselves resilient because of things like this, but because we are the minority, and that is the democratic process, that which is responsible, as our Torah and as our Bible teaches us, the strong have to bear the infirmities of the weak. So we have to come together and make sure that we're okay together.
Thank you for that. So, George Floyd, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, on and on and on. And, we've seen protests before, obviously not to this magnitude. Do you really believe this time will be different? Or do you believe our leaders are truly listening this time?
I think there's something really fascinating about George's death. The protest seems to be more diverse. It has galvanized the attention of the nation. We cannot discount the diversity of the civil rights movement. I say this often. Mm-hmm. The civil rights movement may have had a Black and brown face, but it was a multi-ethnic movement. Bayard Rustin was a gay male who actually organized the March on Washington. Many Jewish communities allowed people of color and university students to use their synagogues and meeting rooms to make posters and stuff. And so it was really, really multi-ethnic. And it seems as if we've revisited that again. It has awakened a consciousness of a nation. Many whites now are coming to say to themselves, depraved indifference, an officer who can, of the law, a peacekeeper, can put his knee on a man's neck who's handcuffed for 7+ minutes. And after the man expires, keeps his knee on the man's neck for a couple of minutes. That kind of depraved indifference moves beyond color and race. It's the destruction of human dignity and the human body. And so it's awakened a consciousness, of the nation. And to me, part of what I'm excited about is seeing the number of young people between the ages of 18 and 30 who've actually taken to the streets. My only concern is this, if you allow me just to pontificate for a moment. We need to pay attention to the wisdom of our elders. When I look back on the civil rights movement, it seems as if, Gandhi learned some things from reading about Christ. King learned things from Gandhi. King came back and shared with civil rights devotee, Joseph Lowery, Andrew Young, even Jesse Jackson, Representative John Lewis. They took those young people and they taught them discipline, nonviolence, not to tear up stuff, not to loot. When they were going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they counseled them before they went over that bridge. If it looks like you're going to be assaulted, don't strike back. To tuck and roll and to curl. My argument is, what saddens me is because there has been peaceful, creative protest. But I want the young people to know, no one's going to remember the name of somebody who threw a rock. Nobody's going to remember the name of somebody who broke a window or stole stuff or spray painted. The names that are remembered are the ones that had a strategy, a plan, a discipline. And so while I'm really excited to see the diversity, the social consciousness, the demand for justice, the young people who hold our future, they need real leadership and guidance, and to really learn from the wisdom of the elders who were effectual in advancing the civil rights that we enjoy, at least to the degree that we do today, came from the wisdom of those elders.
So I hear, and I'm sure both of you are very heartened by the diversity of the peaceful protesters. So Pastor Mondaine, I'll ask this of you, because I know we're getting questions about, you use the term accomplice, and what does that exactly mean? So, if protesters who are not from a community of color were to ask you, okay, once the protests die down, what do you want me to do to become an accomplice? How would you answer that?
To become an accomplice, I'd like you to offer some skin in the game. Number one, put your money where your mouth is. Be an investor in what it's going to take to move the needle forward. Become a member of the NAACP. We're not the only organization, the Urban League. Find something that is positive, that is going to move the needle forward for African-American people or people of color, and then do it. And be very deliberate about doing it, not halfway or just because you feel like it for the moment. Paint yourself black. Stain your heart with the black sticker that says, I'm in this for the long haul. And just like the vow that we take at our marriage, we take a vow to that thing that we've put our hands on, and we don't leave it until it moves. Now, let me say this. The NAACP, at its inception, was 4 Jewish members and 3 Black members. Mm-hmm. And we've had Jewish leadership as national president for 12 years of the organization's 111-year-old history. So, and again, our HBCUs were all founded by Jewish people. So the Jews and the African Americans have always been tied to the hip with one another. We've always helped one another. And it's always been times that we're seeing just like this that have made that connection.
You know, for me,
oh, go ahead, Emmett.
For me, the Jewish community and the African American community, I love what Pastor Mondaine said. I think the Greek word is paraclete, I think, come alongside. I want to take another angle on that because I've been thinking about that. What, people are asking, what can we do? Why people are asking that? Ethnic groups are asking that. What can we do? I want to drill a little deeper. I think this is a matter of the heart.
Yeah.
I think every individual, before we get to color and ethnicity and race, we have to look at our own morality and our own ethic. We have to look at our morality and our ethic, and we have to scrutinize who we are in relationship to humanity. Let me put it in a context for you. I remember when I was working professionally, anytime we were looking to hire a new county administrator or an executive who's going to be leading an organization, and equity, diversity, and inclusion was an important organizational value, I would tell the search firm, if that senior executive does not value equity, diversity, and inclusion as a leadership responsibility personally, we should not hire them. Because people are going to emulate leadership. Quick anecdotal story. I was leading equity, diversity and inclusion for Portland General Electric. I won't call the name of the CEO. I put together the philosophy, working with other employees, our value proposition around diversity and inclusion. I took it up to him on the 16th floor of the World Trade Center. I'm on the 6th floor, I believe it was the 18th floor. And I presented it to him. I didn't hear from him for 8 months. I thought it had fell in the abyss, that's that. He called me one day and said, Emmett, can you come up to the executive suite? I went up to the executive suite. He said, I know that it's been a while since I've gotten back to you, but I had to look at these values, this philosophy, and I had to decide whether or not these could be my personal values. And he said, I came to the conclusion that I can. And when he did that, he walked out to the organization, 1,800 employees, and said, this is our organizational value. And like bobbleheads, you could see senior VPs saying, VPs, directors, supervisors, that leader had that as a personal value that caused others to emulate that. Before you can do anything to come alongside us, you've got to decide who you are, what you believe, and is this a personal value that you can align yourself with? That's essential.
Thank you for that. We have a question. Over the last few decades, we've had significant African-American representation in the upper ranks of the police bureau, including Chief Moose, Chief Foxworth, and of course, Chief Outlaw, who moved on to Philadelphia. Do you feel they have had a positive impact on Portland Police Bureau treatment of minorities or no effect at all? How do you assess the importance of minority representation in police bureau leadership, and how can we further leverage our progress? That's quite a complicated question, but Pastor Mondaine, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I'll start, and I know that Emmett's going to finish because this is one of his favorite pieces. He talked about the fraternity of police. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand the fraternity is greater than the humanism and who they are. They, when I served in the Army, I was an Army Air Force veteran. We were OD green. And they taught us that all of us were OD green, okay? The policemen are black, or are blue, all right? And so they have a family that's greater than the community that they serve, internally. And until that changes, and until there's a safe platform for officers that aren't necessarily just blue to be safe at reporting bad actors and bad apples, it's not going to do much. And I don't care what color it is at the top. It could be zucchini green.
Zucchini green.
Emmett?
Oh, seems like I have an opinion on everything. Oh my God, help me.
That's why we love you.
But hopefully what I'm sharing are some insights. Again, I'm not always right. Pastor Mondaine and I are offering you, a panoramic view of things. One of the things I said for years and what I noticed is that, and I want people to pay close attention to this, many times people of color have title and position, but they don't have the money or the authority. Those are two different things. Nice position, nice title, but the authority to make something happen, you've got to get it from someone else who doesn't look like you, who the majority of the time will be a person who is white in organizational structure. So you don't really have the authority and you don't have the money. I'm not a conservative or liberal. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not politically affiliated. I try to call balls and strikes. I try to take a look at individual issues and formulate an opinion or perspective. Here's what's of important to note, is that just because somebody has a title and a position doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to be effectual. One of the things I'm hearing from conservatives who come at me sometimes, they will say that if you look across the country where you have people of color or Black people who are either elected officials, aldermen, city council women, or whatever those positions, in those particular communities across the street, it doesn't seem like people of color or Black people are doing better. Why is that? Because the harsh reality is that even though we have title and position, sometimes state funding, federal funding, or if that money comes in, we don't necessarily are the ones who have the say over that money. And oftentimes we get that money, if we hit economic tides that rise and fall, it's very difficult to be effectual. So I think to some degree it's a misnomer that we're in a position to affect change when really we're not. And in many professional environments, we deal with the issue of getting people to even want to follow our leadership. There's suspect of whether or not we're qualified. Do we know what we're talking about? We could be educated, qualified, and skilled, and we still have difficulty. So I just want to accentuate the fact that I think it's a misnomer to think that just because we have these key positions that we still have power. Pastor Mondaine, you talk about it. A lot of times we don't have the power to effectuate change.
There are many ways, unfortunately, that communities of color have been disenfranchised. And one of those is voter suppression. Now, in Oregon, as we know, we are the model for vote by mail, but many states still don't have that. And we're concerned, of course, in the current environment about people's ability to vote and whether there's going to be some sort of manipulation, polling stations that are eliminated, that are serving minority communities. I mean, how critical is the need to get out and register folks to vote and then make sure they get out and vote this November? Pastor Mondaine?
Oh, it is critical, 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 critical. I understand the hesitation, especially in Black America, that says, it doesn't matter, but it does matter. It's imperative that every one of us get out and vote. It's important. We do not want to see this, what we thought would never happen again.
Mm-hmm. The right of the individual, one of the most potent things that each of us as citizens has is the power of that vote.
Yeah.
whether you put it in an envelope, seal it, and mail it, or whether you go in the booth in your privacy and cast that vote. That's fundamental to our republic, and it's fundamental to the security of our democracy. A vote will do far more than a rock. We have to remember that. A vote will do far more than a rock. Let me expound a little bit more if I can. Maybe it's the preacher coming out in me. Matt Hennessy don't have a corner on preaching. Pastor Mondaine, they don't have a corner on preaching. Look, let's understand something. A law is powerless unless an individual wants to comply with that law. Yeah. We can pass all kinds of legal reforms on police brutality. But if we don't have people who are joining the force, who are willing to actually comply and conform and comport to that law is ineffectual. We have a constitution that is designed to ensure all of our individual rights. And as a citizen of this democratic republic, we pledge ourselves allegiance to that constitution because it ensures and supposedly protects our freedom. But it's worth no more than the paper it's written on unless I agree to conform and allow my life to operate in conformity with those laws. We have the Equal Protection Clause under the United States Constitution. Every citizen in this country should be afforded the same right as their neighbor. Our fundamental problem in this nation is that because of privilege, that unspoken set of rights. And, whether it's the Jewish community, Muslim community, the LGBTQ community, or whatever community that it is, we've got to look at our individual privilege. And when that privilege buttresses up against the right of our neighbor, we need to have that moral, ethical question within us as to whether or not I'm going to sit back on my laurels and enjoy that privilege, or am I going to surrender that privilege for the common good, for the greater good. Now, all that sounds philosophical, but it's true.
I like your preaching, Emmett.
Sorry.
So we have a question here. Obviously our organizations have had a relationship, but for the average, and by the way, Pastor Mondaine, I heard you on an interview saying about how we need to get to know one another, how white people need to get to know members of the African-American community and other communities of color. So there's a question, well, how do we really get to know one another, not across a meeting room table, but around the kitchen or living room table? If we're being honest, we have to acknowledge that that Portland is mostly white. We know that. Many of us live in neighborhoods where we have no neighbors of color, or our synagogues have few members of color. Where do we go, or what do we do to get to know each other at a personal level that is so critical for breaking down those barriers?
Call 1-800. No, I'm just kidding. There's somebody Black in your circle somewhere, I hope. And make a deliberate action to come to the NAACP. Come to the meetings, meet somebody Black, visit a Black church. Make it your business to just go and visit, where it's going to be safe. Say hello to somebody Black in the grocery store. Ask them their name. Just begin a conversation. It doesn't have to be all one big, huge jump, just little by little. And then have those conversations that you're afraid to have with your families and friends about inviting Blackness into your space. That's what I would say.
Have them over for a Passover Seder, right, Emmett?
Yeah.
Well, Pastor Mondaine is absolutely spot on. You know what I like to say about Pastor Mondaine? He's emerging to be a really key leader in the African American community in Portland, and I really believe that if he continues to do what he's doing, he's going to reach a national platform for advocacy for African Americans. But I'd like to say this, and I don't mean to offend anybody this evening, but I am not a monster. I am not a monster. I'm a human being. And as a matter of fact, if you get to know me, I think I'm a pretty cool guy, pretty funny, you know. Some of my dearest friends in the last 5 years have come out of the Jewish African-American Black dialogue. Sherry and Paul Fishman, Mark and Randy Peterson, Stephen and Dana Sirkin, Rachel Nelson. I could just continue to go down the list and name names of people that Karen and I hold dear. Why? Because we were willing to move beyond the fear, beyond the stereotypes. We are not monsters. We may have a different look, a different style of talk. We may have different food. Look, we have to move beyond our fear. I remember as a professional, Pastor Mondaine, it would still happen today if I was working. I'd go into a room where there'd be 30 people gathering for a meeting, and I wish I had film. I could sit down in a place and you would watch all the seats fill up until there was only a few seats left by me. Or, you know, my neighborhood now, I will sit out sometimes just to get some fresh air in front of my house, and I see neighbors walk by that don't say hello or hi or wave. I want to encourage those that are listening and those that are watching today, you have to take a risk. And I can't promise you, you won't get burned. I have told professionals in the workplace that you're going to be accused of being racist and you're discriminating. That's life. But on par, the majority of the relationships that you reach out to, you're going to find that they're going to be lasting. I tell people all the time, I'd rather be your friend than your enemy. And if we got to know each other, you might like me. And imagine us in our old age, having been friends for 30 years. It's a risk. You won't always get burned. But you got to move beyond your fear. I have to. When I go to a Seder and I'm the only person of color there, how do you think that feels? Yet the Jewish community reaches out, says, thank you for coming. We got to move beyond the boundaries of our fear from the unknown to the known.
Thank you. So, earlier this afternoon, Rachel Nelson and I were talking to one of our rabbis who has young children and talking about the need to be able to try to explain to kids who are, in elementary school, even preschool, how do we talk to them about what's going on in our country? And we have a question from a preschool teacher wondering if, she says children are powerful thinkers and she wants to guide them creatively, but how do we talk to them about what's going on right now? Any advice? Do you know of any resources that are out there to help parents in this challenging time?
Well, let me say this. That's interesting. Every year for the last 3 years, and sometimes I really don't want to do it, but something drives me to do it. I play a character in the season of Kwanzaa, and I play Father Kwanzaa, and I've got on this beautiful robe and this beard and with my black face, and I offer fruit to the children and etc. And the kids are always so elated. They want to run over to Father Kwanzaa. They want to picture with Father Kwanzaa. And I have seen the parents pull their children back, turn their heads, and not want to have anything to do with Father Kwanzaa. The child is delighted because he sees a character. that looks familiar to something that he's been taught is wonderful. He looks like Santa Claus. I don't care that he's black. He's got some candy. He's got some fruit. You know, leave me alone. but I've seen parents pull their children back and rush them along. It hurts. But looking at Father Kwanzaa, looking at people through Father Kwanzaa's eyes has been a remarkable story. And I'm going to write that story one day soon.
You know, when I was coming up, I read Hardy Boy Mysteries. I know a lot of people out there, Nancy Drew Mysteries, you know. We would run through the neighborhood playing the Lone Ranger. Lone Ranger didn't look like me. Hardy Boys didn't look like me. Nancy didn't look like me. Look, I'm no expert on this, please. I'm just offering a thought. And I'll contextualize it this way. Former Oregon Poet Laureate, Paul Ann Peterson, Poet Laureate Emerita. We went over her house one evening. She invited a lot of poets over to her house. She's a white female, her husband. And Karen and I were the only people of color there. 30, 40 people. Didn't really know many of the others. We were walking to her beautiful home. We saw books by Toni Morrison. We looked up and we saw pictures of Lady Day. We saw Billie Holiday. We were so moved that we walked into an environment that we could see a reflection of ourselves. I think fundamentally with children, we try to talk too much. Children don't necessarily have the cognitive ability to discern rational thought that we have developed as adults, fine and refined rational thoughts. There are plenty of books that have Black faces on them, Asian faces, Indian faces, pictures. The more that the children are introduced to a diverse world, they may not be able to grapple with you as an educator from a linguistic or rational, but they feel you. They feel you, they sense you. As a teacher, if they know that if you value, they can tell if you value one kid over the other. It's that feeling until they get to the age of being able to make those cognitive and rational decisions. My only thought is create, not Alice into Wonderland, but create a diverse world for those kids, because then when they get older, they'll have a reference for their experiences. And the world is changing, it's diversifying. Oregon is diversifying. We're gonna look up in another 10, 15 years, you can see a whole lot more people that don't look like you. So that's just my thought.
Great. So we have a couple questions getting back to the protests. One is, this Dennis writes, I'm concerned that agent provocateurs and white supremacist groups are seeking to discredit peaceful protests that are behind some of the current violence, destruction, and looting. Are we getting any assistance from police agencies and their so-called intelligence groups in helping to intercept and remove these groups? I mean, I don't know if you know about, you could answer this question, but do you know about what's happening in terms of these? We know white supremacist groups are trying to take advantage of the situation, but can you answer that question? Either one.
I think Pastor Mondaine is highly more qualified than me to answer that. Maybe.
Yeah. I've asked the same question, quite frankly, and they assure me that they're doing everything that they can to weed out the bad players and to guard against any of the hocus pocus that goes on. I'm looking forward to us going down on Saturday, 100 Black men and myself, to lead our charge on our own and to talk with our voices lifted up. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to identify those groups and protect us, but we're going. So yeah.
So the other concern, of course, we know that COVID-19 has impacted the African American community disproportionately. And now, of course, we see the protests and the lack of social distancing. Some are wearing masks. Some of the protesters, unfortunately, are not wearing masks. And I saw the last couple of nights here in Portland where the protesters were all grouped together near the Justice Center, and there's just no ability to socially distance. Are you concerned about a spike, especially, I mean, in general, of course, but also amongst your, community members?
Well, we live in a time that perhaps more than ever calls for us to rally our courage to be better and to do better. And this COVID era exercise in social distancing still provides an opportunity for us to tighten our social bonds. It is a worry and a concern that this is going to be, an indicator or a spike, So it's, what do? You die of COVID or you die of racism. We have to make a stand.
Do I die of COVID-19 or do I die driving while black?
There you go. Or racism 2020. Okay. There's two debilitating diseases that we've got going on here. COVID-19, racism 2020. We're stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
So I am concerned, but I'm more concerned. I'm concerned. The long story short, yeah.
Anger, I'm not sure if I'm quoting exactly right, I heard it somewhere. Anger rests in the bosom of a fool.
Yeah.
And I'm not calling anybody a fool, but anger is a deceptive appeasement. I burned down the gas station, I burned down the grocery store, I burned down where I work. When my anger has been appeased, I wake up the next day, I need formula for the baby, the store is burned down. I got to drive across town to get gas because it blew up the gas station. Where I'm going with this is that sometimes the passion and zeal of youth that is not tempered can be dangerous. And what I want to say is that, and I'm not sure if I'm quoting exactly right, it's either protest or riot is, I think Dr. King said, is the voice of the unheard, those who are not being heard. So right now, passions are inflamed. Boy, if I was at the forefront of the protest, I would be saying, no, let's come together and figure out how we do this in a constructive way. Because people, despite COVID-19, they're angry, they're going to protest, and there's no way you're going to stop that. But if there was a way that this could be, that people could be trained on how to do this in such a way that they're heard, it's effectual and safe, that's better than just untempered, unbridled passion. And that's been my biggest fear, because you're right. Whoever asked the question, you're right. We're looking at this and saying people are not practicing safe distancing, some are no mask, some are half masked, but people are angry right now, and you're not going to stop the herd. My only regret is that we haven't had a chance to prepare young people and other folk on how to do this in a way that is effectual and has a great efficacy.
And I think the quote you went was, a riot is the language of the unheard.
I'm sorry, I didn't have it exact. I don't like not having it right.
I want to read a beautiful comment from a retired chaplain. She said, some of my most transformative spiritual experiences were in praying together with Black patients and their families. Such authentic, passionate, deep connections with God. So much I learned about my own self in the light of their prayers. I just wanted to mention that. I thought it was beautiful. I want to come back to the Jewish community. And I know that you both know about the role that the Jewish community played in the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, but that was then, 60 plus years ago. And some are concerned about the disconnect, or the fact that we did not remain allies, or as you would say, accomplices. how do you describe what happened between our two communities? And do you think that when we bring up that history, do you believe it's still relevant today when we're talking about things like the need for criminal justice reform? So, for example, here we know in Multnomah County, where 5% of the population is African American, yet 27% of the prison population is African American. That's a serious injustice. What do you think about that?
Well, now more than any time in recent history, our community must summon the level of effort we displayed during the civil rights era. We must unify and bolster our capacity for effective organization. And that was the key, effective organization. No, we didn't lose the connection. We just thought that we'd overcome. And we were all tricked. We gave a few treats. We had a sleight of hand. We gave a few opportunities for education that people are still paying for. And, and we put a few Black people in some key places and said, okay, gatekeepers, do your stuff. But underlying, we were redlining communities. And we were disconnecting the African community from being a part of the economic reprise. And we were taking away from them the ability to be stakeholders. We find that the deplorable numbers of stakeholders by way of home ownership in Portland, boy, the numbers don't lie. So no, I don't think that we got disconnected. I just think that we relaxed our efforts and we stopped organizing and we stopped paying attention and we drifted into our own communities, unbeknownst to ourselves that we were losing that tie. So it was systemic, of course, again, and it was a divide that I don't think that we did on purpose. Nothing happened, but we just relaxed.
You know, there seems to be a feeling that there's a gulf between Black people and Jewish people. This is just my opinion, me speaking. You know, are there Black people and African Americans that have issues with the Jewish community? Yeah. Are there things that maybe people in the Jewish community have issue with Black people? Yeah. Let's not forget, we can't be all things to everybody. Right. We can't be all things to each other.
That's right.
I think where we have been divided is that unless we agree on everything, that we can't, how can two, was it Amos in the Old Testament, 3:3? How can two walk together unless they agree? We don't have to agree on everything. But why can't we find the things that we mutually agree on and walk together? You know, all roads lead, poor analogy, all roads lead to Rome. Don't get upset because I take the east road and you take the west road. What mutual roads can we take together? And let's work on those things together and advocate for those particular things. There are ways that we can be joined at the hip. And so there's no easy answer to that particular question. I don't think we're as divided as sometimes media and people want to say that we are. And I think we can overcome some things. Some things are really hurtful, and you and I know what they are. But I think if we can find common ground and pitch a tent together in that common ground, we can live together peacefully. We're going to disagree on things, but there's more that we have in common. We have a common humanity. Our story is so similar. It is irresponsible for us not to walk together. We don't always have to agree. You may want to ride a skateboard and I want to ride a bike. Let's get going.
Amen. Definitely. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. You know, the state legislature might be meeting soon, virtually or not. And then there's Congress. And take either one of them. What do you want to see come out of either the state legislature or Congress that would help the situation in the African American community, whether it's with COVID, whether it's the economic crisis, or whether it's with what's going on now? What do you think can be done?
I'll defer to you first. Yeah,
I'd like to see us really tackle the low-hanging fruit that bridge that really exist in the criminal justice system, and to fix immediately those horrific cracks and gaps and start there, to unravel those pages of laws and legislatures that create the discrepancies for the Black man from the beginning that has no chance of winning the case, or what have you. I'd like to see us start there and returning some of our men back to their rightful places beside their families and beside their children, and give them an opportunity to be men in their families.
Emmett?
I guess what I'm looking for out of the state legislature and the government is, I'm looking for results. I'm looking for outcome-based performance.
Yes.
I'm looking for demonstrative proof that strategies and goals that are set are achieved.
Yes.
I'm looking for state legislature to hire qualified people who are effective. I get sick and tired of going to meetings and hear people talking about, well, we're doing this out of state covenant, we're planning this, but they have no evidentiary basis that they have achieved what they've set out to do. I like Stephen Covey, he's passed now, begin with the end in mind. If we're gonna go to Hawaii, tell me what Hawaii looks like. So when I get there, this is Hawaii. I am sick and tired of being told that we're gonna do this, we're working on that, we're gonna do this. Get some results that you could point to, and get people who are qualified to do the work. I sound kind of harsh, but I've been in this field. I've watched it up front. Be results oriented. Enough. Produce. Be held accountable. Look, I really don't know the state unemployment office. I don't know much about that, but whoever led that is not leading that anymore. That's what I'm talking about. I don't know if they're justified in saying it's really not my fault and I had these problems with antiquated. I don't know, but the job wasn't getting done.
Yeah.
We need a president that steps forward and says that we're facing one of the greatest enemies that we could face as a humanity. We need somebody that steps up, takes the bull by the horn, and effectuate a plan that we can hopefully eradicate this thing and ensure that people get testing, their PPEs. I'm frustrated, folk, and I'm just being honest.
I think a lot of us are frustrated for sure. By the way, I wanted to mention just something that I wonder if most people don't know in this state of Oregon. I'm an Oregonian. My father was born here. My family's been here for 112 years, and there's a stain that's on this state in its history of discrimination and exclusion. And as you both know, Black people couldn't live here for the first several decades that the state was in existence. I believe it was 1926 when they finally repealed that law. But it was in the year 2000 when the state legislature finally took the wording out of the Constitution. I want you to all think about that.
That's right.
Well, listen, we have a lot of work in front of us to do together as accomplices. And I want to thank both of you. You are both so eloquent, and you are both true friends of the Jewish community. And we want to be there for you, stand in solidarity with you, and we will be there. That's our pledge to you. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our nearly 200 participants that joined the call. And remind everyone that tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we will be hearing from Matthew Green, Senior Policy Advisor from the Oregon Health Authority, as well as Jackie Irby, Deputy Health Advisor to Governor Kate Brown, about reopening and what it looks like now. So again, thank you both, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.
All the best.
Have a great evening.
See you later.
Yes.
Take care.